start with the invocation by Diane, all right?
Father, tonight we'd especially like to remember the first responders, both those around the world, especially those in Paris, France right now, and those within our own country who are dealing with the aftermath of storms. We also thank you for utility workers within our country that are traveling to all parts to try to restore power to people. We thank you that we live in a country where there is cooperation and caring about others, no matter whether they live next door to us or many miles away. Please help us as a council exemplify that own caring in our deliberations tonight. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, Diane. Let the minutes reflect Councilman Shoemaker is absent, so there are 6 present.
Yes, and he did call to apologize, but he suddenly became ill about 5:30 tonight and decided not to share that with all of us, so.
All right,
Thank you.
He was keeping us.
so again, any action taken by the council will still require 4 votes tonight, so. All right, let's go to the approval of the minutes from March 28th.
Move to approve.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, I'd like to welcome all our visitors tonight. Thank you all for taking the time on a pretty nice night, a lot nicer than last night, that's for sure. I think the snow's all gone, so, but thank you for coming. Reports, oral and written communications. We'll start with a fund report that's been presented for your perusal. Any questions or thoughts on that? Lynn, any comments?
No, everything looks pretty much like it should for this time of year.
Okay. All right, and I did pass out a recent op-ed by Morton Marcus, just for your information. It talks about Warsaw as a micropolitan area, which is defined as anywhere from a population of 5,000, I think up to 50,000, 10,000 to 50,000, and talk essentially about our growth, our population growth, and most importantly, the trend that micropolitans like our community might set the future with the ability to digitally work from home, folks wanting that small town life and good quality schools, good government, good safe city, safe small city, might prefer to do work in a community like this. So that was kind of the gist of the article. So just for your information. But they featured Warsaw with our growth and our business activity. So thought that was worth you seeing. Having really, well, I guess this is unfinished business. I'm going to have Diane start a discussion, and actually the committee, excuse me, it would be Cindy. Cindy, who worked on your committee?
Jeff and Mike.
And Mike, okay. So I'll have you guys lead this. I'm going to put this up on the board so you all can see what's going on. Essentially, I asked the council to put together a policy or at least guidelines for non-for-profits so that when the budget discussion comes up, we're oftentimes receive many requests from our local non-for-profits. I think we feel a duty to assist those non-for-profits, but wanting some type of guidance as to how to allocate those funds. We had several new non-for-profits last year apply, and I think the council really was wanting some guidance. So this is actually coming from within, and hopefully will be useful this year when we start budgets in a couple months. So.
So just a history then, for those of you that weren't there, then I met with Susie Light initially. She offered to help us look at all of this. And then the task force has met with her. in order to come up with our proposed application. Council, what we're looking for tonight, this doesn't require any type of a resolution or an ordinance. We're just looking for consensus to go ahead and start with this application this year, understanding that we may have some bugs that need to be worked out, so. It's okay, I'll just reach it.
And I think maybe, just to kind of piggyback on what the mayor said, we know for a fact that United Way funding is being cut for a lot of organizations. So we fully anticipate we could be getting even more requests this year. And we want to make sure that we are doing the appropriate thing, and we are taking all due diligence in how we are spending the money. I think,
Mayor, I'm not sure how to get this to move to the actual application. This is,
scroll it with your finger.
yeah, but it's not, it comes to the end and stops.
There's 3 different forms.
Yeah, I'm trying to find them. Oh, here we go.
There you go.
there we go.
Got it.
Okay.
Yay.
Okay, and first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that everything we were funding was in compliance with state laws or uniform accounting, so that we were not funding anything that we shouldn't be. And these are some of the categories that we are allowed to fund, and that will be the first thing that the committee will look at as to whether the request fits into any one of these categories according to the Indiana code.
I think related to the meeting a few weeks ago, up at the top, in some cases, funds may be used for general operating expenses. I think that was modified based on some discussion and comments, but like Cindy is saying, and Diane, your help also, and Mike, that we're following state code as we look at all of these requests, and those coming to us know that they must fit into one of these guidelines.
Okay, everyone will need to submit an application cover sheet, and this is just basically a bit of a summary about their request, the project cost, the purpose of the funding, and so forth. It's pretty cut and dry.
What I appreciate and what I think, Mike, when we met several weeks ago, it's far more specific, and it's going to provide more information for us as these nonprofits come. They make their requests. It'll just provide, it'll be clear, better than what we currently ask.
That, and it's a much more formalized way to do this. Everybody's working off the same, literally, pages.
I think that's been one of the problems in the past,
It has.
because everybody has kind of submitted in their own format, and so we should be looking at the same format for everyone.
That way we can all compare apples to apples.
As you can see, looking at this, it's pretty detailed, the things that we are asking them to submit to us. And so we feel like we should have a really good handle on the project or service that they are requesting.
As Diane works to the last page, you can see the format that we're asking of this. Again, what Mike has just said and what we have wrestled with is oftentimes we get information, it's just different format, it's hard to tell. Not only the present realities, but also what they've done in the past.
And I think another thing that we knew that we were lacking was we did not understand where all the money came from that these agencies operated under, how our money might fill a unique need or a gap that wasn't otherwise going to be filled, and so that we could look and see just where exactly the city fit into the funding request. So then maybe, Cindy, you want to talk a little bit about the process that we're thinking about using once we receive these?
Yes, once we receive the applications, as it stands right now, the committee composed of Jeff and Mike Landeris and myself will review the applications, and we will each score the applications, and then we will meet to kind of compare notes and get some type of feel as, you know, maybe Jeff has 20 points on one and I have 10, and we kind of talk it out, and in that instance, we may have to have the organization come in and personally meet with us because we may have some questions that haven't been answered on the form. And we will have an evaluation. Well, we'll be scoring them on the categories here: the summary, the purpose of the project, evaluation, budget, organization, and attachments. And then we will have a point system for each of those. And I think the point system is really going to help us be more objective in how we distribute funds. I think in the past, perhaps we've been a little bit too subjective, and I think this is going to narrow it down for us.
I do like the idea of the rubric to score, and whether it's just our committee acting as advisory to assist the whole council, or other council members want to get involved. Again, I just like the way this is set up to help us, again, make better decisions for, selecting who's going to get what, how much, et cetera.
And then I believe the next step in the process will be that your task force will bring a recommendation to the full council for them to look over, then the scoring rubric and how the decisions, then the council as a whole will make the decision as to what exactly is funded.
I do like Cindy's idea where we act as advisory, and maybe it could be we rotate on this board as the years go by. But I think it would be helpful for the general membership to have that in front of you, what we were thinking individually or collectively as we, consider these requests.
And then this will be an entirely new step. Do you want to talk about this a little bit? Oh, this
See,
will-
what,
oh,
the
wait,
evaluation?
sorry.
The evaluation. Yes, and I think this is going to be an important step. And I know from past experience, when I've submitted grants for different organizations, I've had to do a follow-up telling how the money was used. A lot of cases, they want to know how many people were impacted or what type of impact it had on your community as a whole. And so we're going to be asking at the end of the year for the organizations to share that information with us. And that will help, maybe solidify our thoughts for the next year if they come back to us for funding.
Are we gonna, I know we're preliminary here, but do you think we will use this year for people that we've given money to in 2018?
2019.
You mean for 28? Yeah, the people that we've given money to for 2018?
Yeah,
Yeah, I would like to try
That's
it.
the
If you
idea.
guys,
Sure, let's try it.
okay.
So
That's a good thought.
when they pick up their application, they can pick up this and submit it back
And
to
where will
your
they pick
committee?
up the application?
We usually send them out. And then if someone new comes in, then they'll pick it up, but usually we send them out to who had,
So you would get a
Funding
request via email or something, and then you would send them a PDF, is that what you're saying? Or, use snail mail and send them out, or,
they can pick them up, whichever.
okay. But
Or we could email them.
they're emanating from your office?
We send out the request
Okay,
forms, yes.
And I think Lynn's office needs to probably dictate when we need to have this out and when they need to be back in.
I was just gonna ask that,
Right.
what's your normal timeline on these?
Usually when we send out the budget stuff, but since this is new, I'm gonna try to do it maybe the first week of May, and then they can have it back by the last week of May, and that gives them a whole month then to complete it. And if they have questions, then they can get their questions answered, which is something we talked about earlier before the meeting started.
Are you guys happy with that timeline, giving them 30 days?
I wouldn't want to give them any less than 30, I don't think, because it's
Yeah, I
pretty
was thinking that,
complex.
is that enough time?
Yeah, 30 to 45, I don't know.
I agree, minimum 30 at least.
Well, one of the things that we talked about was when I prepare the council budget, I could put not profits in as a placeholder in terms of the total overall amount that you want to use, and then we can distribute, then we can break it down into the smaller, what's going to go into that amount, so that we wouldn't, by budget time, have to have the exact amount you're going to give to this organization or that organization, but just a not to exceed amount for the not-for-profits, if the council would want to do it that way and give them a little bit longer, like until June 15th to turn them
My
in.
suggestion, I asked if the council wants to set a cap from the budget, not a specific cap per organization, but a total. And then that can be the placeholder in the budget, and then the detail can come, knowing that we can't exceed that amount anyway.
Well, my suggestion 2 years ago was, I'm going from memory here, 1.5% of the general fund, which put us right in the sweet spot of everything that we were getting requests for.
And last
And-
year, we
And had
used,
some left over.
and last year, we used 10% of
The
the
general fund
council budget.
Or
Yeah.
the general fund levy, or the expenses, what,
It was the general fund budget.
the total budget of
Yeah.
the general fund?
Yeah.
Would you say 1.5%?
That's the number I would have to go back, Mayor, and look in my notes. I'm
I looked
going,
it up, and yeah.
Is that right?
1.5%'s right.
okay. And that gave us all the money we needed. It even gave us a little extra, I think. We were right in it, though, right in the sweet spot. like I
I
said.
appreciate that suggestion. I think that's,
Okay.
that's important to do that. And then, you can back in with the number of requests you get and adjust the amounts that way, knowing what your top limit is.
And that'd be a lot easier on your end too, Joe, because then you could just put that number in there.
So would the council like to do that, then have it due June 15th, and then we'll set a placeholder in the budget of 1.5% of the general budget, and
So
then,
that gives everybody about 45 days.
because some groups, depending on when their board meetings fall, may need to have a little bit more time.
Is it enough time?
I think so. If you make it much longer, it's going to come in at the last day anyway.
Mayor, when do you need those numbers?
Again, if I've got a
Well, if there's a
placeholder,
placeholder, it won't
it
matter.
doesn't really matter.
How about if we give them 60 days? Because if their board meets once a month,
And we typically start those hearings when, the 1st of August?
so if
And
we
I
had them
don't-
by 4th of July weekend, that'd give them 60 days.
By the way you're talking, they will not come in and request, the requests will go to the committee, then the committee will make a recommendation, so they won't come in to the regular council meeting for their request. So I don't see any problem with that process.
And would the 1.5% be based on the present year budget?
Yes, we figured that we'd have to do it that way because you don't know what the coming year
Right.
budget is until we go through the budget. So we'd always have to go, like your taxes, and go retroactively back a year.
And what we're doing here is just kind of setting up guidelines and rules.
It's a
We're
start.
gonna try it this year. We'll see how this works out. We'll see how the application works out. I appreciate all the work Cindy and the committee have done, and Diane, Lynn, I mean, Foundation makes they give grants for, that's what they do. And going to Susie and getting her thoughts on that, I think was very smart. And she's, I think, provided a lot of good input on this form. I like the uniformity of this. What I really like is that you've asked specifically what financials that you want to see. And in the past, we've gotten them all over the map. So you're very specific, and I really appreciate that.
I did ask our attorney to review this. Do you have any comments?
I think it's excellent. I think it's great that you point out right on the application those things that you can legally provide monies for. And I think it helps clarify not just the different areas you can provide money for, but the different things: establish, aid, maintain, and operate. I think that it's really sound not as a legal opinion, but I also like that you put on there, how many Warsaw residents will this be serving? I think that's very informational to you all to make a decision.
And the only thing I would say is I think you need to put in big bold up on top when you want these turned in and put
That's a
your
good idea.
date.
Yeah, Susie
due.
recommended once we set dates that we do go ahead and do that up at the top. And
Usually we
also,
include that in the cover letter when we send out the
Okay.
packets.
and that way it could change from year to year if we needed to.
I'd suggest putting it on the application, but as long as they know, either way is fine.
The other thing that I had a question about, Lynn, was when we ask for the summary of the year, I'm assuming it should be like February 15th or something like that, so that they have like 45 days after the year end and they have their financials to then report back to us as to what they did. Is that like a reasonable expectation? I know most of the boards I sit on,
The
it
state
takes
gives us
about
60 days to.
60 days after,
close out,
so.
yeah, To have our annual report done.
So we might want to be looking at maybe like March 1st then to ask them to return the sheet that says how they used the funds and how much they used and,
Yeah, I didn't think about that. I was also thinking that could be part of their request if they come to us again. Did we support you a year ago? If so, we need that report as you request again, so.
Yeah, that'd
I
be a
don't
way
care,
to
I'm
do it
just
too,
saying when I
yeah.
looked at it, that's what I was thinking.
okay.
Yeah, I thought I saw on one of the drafts, a place where they could put the amount of money they're requesting, and I don't see that here. Did it get,
It-
Yes, there it
Rejected?
is on the first page.
It's right here at the bottom. The
Where?
amount requested, it's in bold.
In bold, amount
Right.
requested.
do I not have that one?
Let me get a laser, yeah, right there.
Page 2.
So it asks when they
It's about the
intend,
last thing they ask.
when they intend to do it, how much you're asking, how much the total is. Like, you know, they might have a project of 10,000, but they're asking us for 5, and how many Warsaw citizens would benefit from that.
And it also shows up on the funding budget page too, where it, as you itemize each thing, and then at the end, there's a total expenses, total requested from City of Warsaw.
Right.
I think it's a great place to start, and it'll be a great tool for us this year, and I'm sure we'll want to tweak it as the years go by.
So just with the suggestions you've got, you feel comfortable finalizing this and just getting a consensus from the council that this is the direction we'll head for 2019?
Jack, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments.
Okay.
First off, I think this exceeded my expectations. I think it's really good. I want to thank the committee for the hard work that they put into it, and a special shout out to Susie Light. Her experience and expertise it shows. Just a couple of comments. I really like the fact that under the executive summary, it said to begin with a half-page executive summary. That's great. Keep it short, maybe even a paragraph. You know, because there's a lot of questions, or a lot of things here that they can cover, and the longer it gets, the harder it's going to be to muddle through it and read it all and remember it. So if I had a point to push, that would be one of them. Another thing was, I like the fact that you've got the Indiana code, and you ask which applicable Indiana code this request covers. If I had one thing to add, it would be to ask them, how does your request fit into this code? That was something that you and I had run into last year when we sat up in a dark room trying to figure out, okay, you know, does this fit? How's it fit? Well, we don't these requests or their business as well as they do. And we tend to shoot in the dark sometimes, so it would be really helpful if they would be able to do that. Now, maybe that is covered somewhere else in the application that I've not seen, but those are the two main things that I would like to
Yeah,
see
but it
happen.
doesn't say.
Keep it short. And how's it fit how does your request fit in one of these ICs?
One thing that might be nice for the committee to give to the whole council, you know, with our recommendations for funding would be just a copy of that executive summary too, so they have an idea of what was asked for.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say is I think you need to be careful. The State Board of Accounts isn't going to be interpreting what the funding requester, how they felt it fit in. They're going to be asking us how we felt it fit in. So I think you're right. I think that needs to be part of it, but we're the ones that will
Will we
then
still take ownership?
interpret that and take ownership of that.
So maybe that needs to be part of the rubric.
Where's the spot that it shows,
there's a
ask
place
what
that-
IC code
I don't know.
pertains?
What page is that on,
Top
Jack?
of page
Very
2.
top.
The top of
page
page
Up,
two.
okay, yeah, there it is.
Yeah, there
So
it
maybe
is right
add a
there.
line or two below that, to just put a narrative of how that applies.
Keep it short.
I'm still not finding
Which page do you want that
Page
on?
2,
I don't have.
Page 2 of the application form.
The code,
Okay,
second
this-
page
that's
where the
the
code
evaluation-
is.
That's the
Yeah.
council's form right there,
No.
Yeah, that's valuation score sheet.
It's there.
right.
Yeah, up
there,
there, top,
right there.
there it is, on the
Is
top.
it.
that-
Oh, I see, at the very top,
add a couple lines.
in bold, right?
Right-
Yeah, I see it.
Right beneath where it says date of application, that
Right
full
there.
IC, add a couple lines and ask to provide a narrative of how it applies to IC, whatever it is. That's a good suggestion.
For instance, like, yeah, the IC code and it promotes tourism or whatever. Just a simple sentence.
So we,
Number 2 on the narrative does cover some of that. They would have to on those 2 bullets, the purpose of the project. It'd be bullets 1 and 2.
Lynn,
Then,
oh, just pass, okay, I could have walked.
I think it'd be those 2 right there that you would have to
Thanks, Mike.
include that. So the code is identified, and then when they go into, right after the summary, number 2, I know I would be looking for that if I was on the committee.
so put it underneath, well, you are
Well,
on
I
the
think it-
committee, so,
Yeah, I mean, you can add it, be more specific, say code, but the bullets 1 and 2, and what do I know? But I would say that that's probably where it should go.
so put it, yeah, because I think maybe on the cover page, you don't need a narrative, but maybe right here, under this statement number 2, add a bullet point, explain how you feel your project relates to these codes or whatever. We,
Could be purpose of project, service, or capital project request related to or applicable to Indiana code. I mean, it could be part of the bold, but again, I would say bullets 1 and 2, but it doesn't matter, add it, I'm just,
Cindy, can you make a note of that? And then I had Whitney put this, we converted it over to Word, so we can actually add that ourselves.
The only thing I'd be careful of on that narrative, that's going to disqualify them if it doesn't meet one of those. And even if you just score a 0 for, that's
Right.
not going to matter. If
They have to
don't
meet a
the
code.
IC code, they're disqualified from this. So
Right.
I think that should be very clearly stated when they state their case. I don't know that I'd put it in the rubric, but you guys can figure that out.
I'm kind of like you, Jeff. I think we'll be able, as going through the application, figure out how it applies to the particular code.
But it wouldn't hurt to just have them state to see where they think they're coming in, because I know exactly what Jack means, because we went through trying to fit them in ourselves. And as Susie said, we shouldn't be the ones doing the work.
Exactly.
It should be clear from the applicants where they think they fit in.
I think, Mayor, it does say that the nonprofit request application up at the top, according to the Uniform Cities Accounting Manual, public funds cannot be donated or given unless you go, and then it's the Indiana code. So it is there. You're out if you can't identify and then explain it to us. The way I'm looking at it, yeah. Okay.
So maybe in the executive summary, it could just be added a line and how the IC code you're using pertains to your,
Well, either there, as Jeff suggested under number 2, make a separate bullet point. If the council will indulge us, we can play with this and just make sure it gets in there, if that's all right with everybody.
I think those are great suggestions.
Did you have any more great suggestions, Jack?
No, but I was just, I was wondering, I'm looking, so they need to, do they need to answer each one of these bullet points?
Correct.
Okay. That could be
And then-
lengthy anyhow, couldn't it?
We were,
yeah, that's what I was thinking in the executive summary, because if that's gonna be half a page, and if they put IC code and why, it could be part of the executive summary, it'd be easier then to.
So
Right,
under
that's
the,
first.
Cindy and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but next door we were told, these organizations fill this out all the time. I mean, it's far more specific. Like when they would look at ours, they would probably be thinking, was I at that right meeting? Yeah, this is a little bit easier than what we normally do. I remember her giggling a little bit and said, this is what they do, that they're used to this. They have it.
Okay.
so we could put, just briefly explain why your agency is requesting this project, what Indiana code it fits under, Indiana code, parentheses, codes, because some of them do fit under more than one, as we found. Service or capital project funding, what outcomes you hope to achieve. We just make that part of that. Then you guys would have it right away when you looked. That would be one of the first things you saw. I think that would be helpful from my experience of looking through these before.
So
Okay,
move it to the executive summary then, just.
and just put a little,
Okay.
okay. Any other suggestions that anybody else wanted to make as they look through this? Jerry, did you have anything? Mike and Jeff, I know you've lived with it for a while.
Do you want to present the final at the next meeting, or do you want to just get consensus and go with it?
My preference would be to get consensus with that change so that we can get these out at the beginning of May, so they have 60 days, because otherwise you're dragging it into the middle of July. But if somebody's not comfortable with that, that's okay. I just want,
I think the changes are probably minor enough that,
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's already in there. But if you want it to be bold and more upfront, I really think that the council would agree. I mean, I'm feeling that way, and I think it's in there.
Yeah, the yeoman's work has been done.
It
It's
is.
just a
Yeah, it's
couple.
there.
All right.
Is that okay, Cindy, to say
yes,
that? I think,
I
okay.
think so.
So is there a consensus to accept this with the recommendations of this board and move forward with it for this year's budget?
Yeah, for me,
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, there's consensus.
Mayor, as presiding officer, do you want to entertain any comments from the public, or do you want to wait until we actually formally, just a reaction, or if we're missing anything? I don't know. I don't even know if that's right, what you would want, but
I would be happy to entertain if there were any questions.
huh, there's your email,
Yes, sir.
sorry. How do I turn it off?
Will,
How
did
do
you
I
want to
turn-
say something? You'll have to come to the microphone.
I'm feeding you my ideas. Yeah.
My friend there and neighbor suggested that he didn't see anything about when the award would be made. Is it made as the application is approved?
Well, it's in the following year's budget, so it would be for the following year, and those are distributed pretty much right away, aren't they? Or, that's probably a good
Well,
question.
yeah,
Wouldn't
it
that be
depends
one-
on how the contract reads. Some people get their distributions monthly, some get it semi-annually, some get it
So-
all at once.
So the answer is, they get the money based on what's stipulated in the contract? Okay.
In the budget year that it's being applied for, which,
Right.
yeah.
But we would need to finalize
answer
the
your question?
individual amounts when we finalize the budget.
Part of the budgeting process, yeah.
Yeah,
At that
usually
point, they'll
sometime,
know.
yeah, we'll finalize, you guys finalize it during the budget process, so we know what to put in the contract.
And like a lot of things, the budget itself is approved by the council, but the contract comes from the Board of Public Works. So the contract would actually go through the Board of Public Works then in order to award the contracts.
All right, I think we've got our marching orders.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Diane.
All right. So, with that discussion, let's move on to new business. Resolution 2019-0401. This is the approval of the financial management policy that was introduced at the last meeting. Susan, you want to come up and just?
You can just use that podium tonight, unless you wanted to, do you have a presentation? It might be easier.
No, this is fine. If there's any questions, I can pull it up. I have a flash drive. Basically, I am just back a second time. I was here on March 18th to introduce to you the comprehensive financial policy that the city's working group pulled together that was comprised of Lynn, the mayor, Jack, and Jeremy representing redevelopment. Through the comprehensive financial policy, there are some guidelines developed for the city to help basically provide a roadmap for managing finances into the future. It incorporates various pieces of criteria that both GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, as well as rating agencies recommend for strong management for local units of government. It includes budgeting and long-term financial planning, transparency of the city's financial information, a debt policy piece, and a liquidity and reserve policy, implementing a reserve target. So essentially, tonight there is the resolution in front of you to approve that policy. If there are no questions or requested changes that the council has. And then as part of managing that policy, there is an annual review at the time of, right before budgeting. You were talking about kind of the process for approving grants. This would be June 30 of each year that policy would be reviewed to see if there were any necessary changes to it. Basically, you know, again, it establishes the roadmap for city leadership to oversee and to manage, help maintain financial stability for the city, and would transcend, you know, councils as well as leadership within the city. So it's really providing a nice framework for the city to operate. The debt policy itself does set certain guidelines, again, based on criteria from S&P, some recommendations from GFOA. The city's well within those guidelines. The reserve also sets a reserve target formally. The city has mentioned a reserve target within rating processes before, and it's well within that floor for what that reserve target would be. And honestly, the city has been very fortunate to maintain reserves above, and it tends to continue to have strong reserves, but it does set that floor, which is something that the rating agencies do want to see. So with that, are there any specific questions related to the policies? I'm happy to address those, or the resolution.
I do have a question on ratings, and it talks about, on page 6, in connection with bond financing, shall evaluate whether there's a benefit to have one or more ratings assigned to the bond issue. Can you explain that?
Sure. So essentially, when the city is evaluating whether to pursue a rating, the evaluation should include whether the cost of the rating is going to likely gain better interest rates than, with that rating in place, than the cost itself. So you should have a savings, you should see a savings by having that rated debt from the market. So sometimes there may be a recommendation that the city pursue more than one rating. We have found right now with Baker Tilly's pricing director that really one rating is sufficient to go to the market to help market the bonds, and really the cost of two ratings at this point probably is not worthwhile.
So from a separate agency?
Yes, yes. So
Okay,
you could have like a rating
gotcha.
from Moody's as well as S&P.
Right.
Yeah. And there are different kinds of credit enhancements that, you know, really your municipal advisor should consider with you every time that bonds are issued.
How often do you see 2 ratings on a bond?
Not as much anymore in Indiana. You know, back probably 10 years ago, it was more prevalent. But again, it's sort of evaluating what the cost savings are likely to be by
Right.
having those two ratings, and we
Right.
just don't believe that the city would realize that, and it's able to, with all the strong credit position that you're in, you're able to market just with the one rating that sort of is a independent credentialing of the city's credit.
So it's the credit rating of the city you're talking about? What-
Yes.
And you say that there's a cost involved with that if you get a second rating?
Yeah, each rating agency has separate fees that it assesses to go through its process and then to provide that independent
What
analysis.
typically are those costs?
It varies. Really offhand, I wouldn't want to say without pulling it. I mean, the savings that you should have by having that rating in place are the interest across the period of the
You need to
borrowing.
offset the cost of the rating.
Yeah, yeah.
But what is the cost of the rating?
Can I get back with you on that? I mean, they do vary
Just
based,
give
it's
me a
based
general.
on,
Is
it's,
it $10,000, $100,000?
it's under $100,000. Typically, they range between $10,000 to $20,000,
Okay,
depending on the size.
that's-
I think our last bond was $16,500.
So,
Yeah, that answers
yeah,
what
I
I
just,
wanted to know.
without knowing kind of it does vary on the principal amount. I mean, typically, that's going to be what, the size that you would see because of the size of debt that you typically want to issue.
I think our focus here is to try and improve our credit rating by formalizing these policies. So,
Which, go ahead, sorry.
well, I mean, we do a lot of these things, but they ask for policy that's been approved by this body. And it's just more financial practices that we employ, but we don't have a formalized policy that you all have approved. And that's really what this exercise is about, setting that 15% reserve, setting the debt limit, setting the investment policy. During a ratings call, they'll ask, do you have a reserve policy? Yes. Well, can you send it to us? Well, we just do, it's not formalized. So you're going to improve your ratings if you've got these all formalized, not only on a piece of paper, but approved by this body right here. And that's the important part, I think, of one of the things we're trying to get done, is to give us potentially a better chance to improve our rating, which would save the taxpayers money. It also, with all these policies in place, it gives us sound financial practice when we sit down to do our budgeting. It gives us better estimating and projections as far as our expenses and our revenues. So, on page 1 pretty much gives the objectives of what we're trying to get done. And I think that's really critical here, that we formalize these so that, again, potentially we go from a AA minus to maybe a AA, and that drops the risk for the investor and
Gets us
a
a
little
better
better
rate.
rate.
Yeah, and essentially, just to echo that, the general obligation criteria, so any property taxes that are pledged to repay your bonds, 20% with S&P's criteria is based on management, and a lot of that is whether these policies have been formalized. So you have a good rating right now, but we do believe there's a place for movement without a lot of effort from the city, because it's something the city can control, and you already do that.
This may not be necessary, but under Roman numeral 4E, the periodic review of the target, we've got at a minimum during the budget process. Could we insert the word annually, at a minimum annually during the budget process, just to make it clear that it is going to be reviewed at least once a year? Because reading this, you might not necessarily know how many times we go through the budget process or what might happen. And you might know a better word to insert that word annually, but it just seems like it would be good to clarify that. Maybe that's too nitpicky, but I know when I read through it, I had to read through that twice to figure out when exactly we were doing it, so I just thought it might make it.
Doing what? Establishing the reserve policy?
No, when it's going to be
Oh, I
reviewed.
thought you said Roman
4.
numeral 4.
E under the periodic review of the
Yeah.
target.
Roman numeral 4, section E, lowercase e.
Yeah, if you go actually, and that's fine, we certainly can review.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, we can review
I highlighted
that
that
periodic
myself,
review.
but I figured-
View of the target. It does have it within B for the reserve level. If you go to page, it starts on page 7, but then,
Right,
yeah, it does say that it's gonna be looked at, that they'll measure compliance, but we can certainly put that there. I think that's a great idea, yeah.
it's just a little
Yeah.
word, but it
It's
just
good,
feels
yeah.
to me like it would make it more clear.
I'm happy to revise that and send that back.
Okay.
I had a specific question when I read through here. I'm on page 4, which at the very bottom, which
What
spills.
Roman numeral is it? Because it's different on different
Oh,
machines.
okay, it would be, always asking me the tough questions, Diane.
I know,
Roman numeral 2,
okay.
general guidelines,
Okay, thank
C.
you.
And it has the criteria there by which we need to live within our means. And then below, if you spill over, it said, at the last sentence, any changes to this policy goal must be approved by the mayor.
Yeah.
You see that?
Actually, yeah, that's under Roman numeral 3. You said 2, Mike.
Yeah, I did say 2, isn't it 2? Yeah. It's 2 on mine, transparency.
3.
Okay, you're right, debt maintenance, it was at the top. I
Debt
missed
management
3,
policy.
my bad.
Which letter?
That's fine, okay.
3,
Subsection.
C, and then just before D, it just,
It's
I
like the
highlighted
last
it when I
line.
read through it, it said any changes to this policy goal must be approved by the mayor. And I thought, well, shouldn't council have some say-so in that?
I just defer to the language. My assumption, it would be the committee, which is made up of the council representative, redevelopment
Yeah,
commission,
there's
clerk
a-
treasurer, and the mayor. I mean,
Yeah, why don't we change, would
let's
that
just-
be sufficient to change that to the to the?
Management committee
Management committee, yeah.
Yeah. I
for
just-
presentation to the
Okay.
council, if there's a
Yeah, I
change.
just figure more eyes on the ball is better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
I didn't have her put that in there.
Not saying you did, not saying you did, I just thought you
Well,
did.
we start with a standard piece and then just talk through things and change
Understand.
them as needed, yeah.
But at least you know we read it.
Yeah, that's good, and you should, I mean, it really is a nice guideline for the city, and
Yeah.
I commend you for reading it and for investing in it.
So, I'm trying to see this in my mind's eye, will this be like a policy manual, like
Yeah.
a binder that we'll have, if somebody calls, and say, we want to see your policies, you can say, here you go?
It creates a best practice scenario that we have to set a reserve at a certain level. And it talks about how projections are made so that those projections can then be used when we budget. So it's just really a set of best practices and policies, and I think at any time, the committee can review if they feel maybe we need to increase that reserve, if they feel like maybe we need to change the debt limit. But again, I think all these benchmarks are from best practices in other municipalities, and,
Yeah, good idea.
I'm willing to give this a try.
Yeah.
I think the best thing to me is having this formalized committee of council representation, redevelopment commission, mayor, and clerk treasurer's office, to sit down and then utilize these things to put the budget together. It just gives us, again, I feel a little bit better that we're not just maybe relying on past performance as much as we now have past performance and good solid revenue projections for the future. So it's just, again, I'm really excited about it because I think it takes just a little bit of the guesswork out of the budgeting process.
And out of their ratings calls. When
Yeah.
they ask for the policy, now we can say, yeah, we have a
We
policy.
do have one, and it's written, and it was approved by the council, and we'll send it to you. So, yeah.
So do you need a motion to approve this with
Yeah, this is a
changes that we
resolution.
Do
suggested?
you want to wait until the next
Or
meeting when the corrections have
review
been
it
made
again?
on the?
I think the only correction is, I think you could approve it with corrections, or if you want to, it doesn't matter to me.
Why don't we see it one last time,
Okay, sounds good. I can.
if that's okay?
Yeah.
Will we be able to get things in line? for-
Yes.
Okay. We got, in other words, we got time to do it?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll meet our budgeting timelines.
The one thing too that is positive about you doing this, you recently, at the end of last year, went through the rating process. It's nice to have a track record of adhering to it, so it's good that you're doing it right now. That'll give you, you're not looking to my knowledge, not looking to issue debt in the near future, so it does give you some time. It would be rated.
All right, any other questions of Susan while she's here? I'm not sure you'll need to come back
Okay.
the next time. That's why I think we've ironed out most of it. Any final questions or comments?
I would like to comment on the fact that this is a good, strong start. And it's my understanding that we're one of the first communities that have
You
really done this together, so we're really kind of drafting the
Trailblazers.
Yeah, we're trailblazers on this one. And a lot of the focus has been on the fact that it helps helps our credit rating, which is very important. But what I'd like to say to our constituents is that it should also provide a certain amount of comfort to you in that we have thought through a policy and brought it together so that you know we're not just shooting from the hip. And that's what our creditors want to know. I would hope that that's what our constituents would want to know as well. So for that reason, I'm surprised that more towns haven't already done it 20 years ago.
Well, thank you all.
Thank
I'll
you.
revise this and get it to Lynn, and then if you have any other questions, feel free to email me or call.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Oh, do we need a motion to table
I don't think you need a motion to table it. You can just submit it again at the
Yep.
next hearing.
that? Okay, so no action.
No action was taken.
All right, finally, we've got the tax abatement form from the Little Crow Lofts. Jeremy?
Yes, you have before you, Little Crow Law submitted their CF1, which is just their compliance form for their previously granted tax abatement. They are in year 3 of this abatement, and this form is for next year's taxes. So when I say year 3, the taxes they pay next year will be their 3rd year of that application. The approval was based on $6.4 million in rehab that was performed by them. This was specific to a affordable housing project that was done, so it does not necessarily require additional jobs, but it is for real property. And like I said, they have performed as they had stated they would.
Questions?
I move to accept as presented.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thanks, Jeremy.
Let me go over this real quick.
Yes, Jeremy passed out the redevelopment commission report. That is a statutory requirement that I know he works very hard on. And he'll go through just briefly his work here tonight. This needs to be kept with your budget manual because there's a lot of important information in here that will carry over into the budget.
Yeah, so like we have done in the previous years, I think 2012 was the first time we started putting together financial reports. So it's been a few years now. The main thing that you'll want to look at, and this is what gets submitted to the state with Lynn's help. We submitted all this information to the state last week, so we're in compliance with the state requirements for those submittals. But it has the board members of the Redevelopment Commission and Redevelopment Authority. It has any employees paid for out of the Redevelopment Commission, which in this case is myself and James Emmons, the city engineer. It has 2018 expenditures, so we're looking back a year. All the reporting that we're doing is looking back a year, so we're looking at what we did last year. It has the 2019 budget, so it has a look at what we're doing this year. And then each section for each TIF district has the redevelopment plan that was approved by the Plan Commission with the various projects and a kind of an outline of those budgets moving forward over the next 4 to 5 years. So it kind of gives you a look ahead. So when you're doing budgets, not only looking at what we're accomplishing this year, but looking at where we're going next year, you'll see a list of projects that are budgeted, as well as where the financials are for that district in terms of the revenue that it's bringing in, the amount of cash that they have on hands, any bonds that are issued out of, or debt that is owed within that district. So it does have a lot of information, and that information all allows you to make budget decisions in June and July. The other important thing to know is after I go through each overview and give you project list and revenue and where we're at moving forward over the next 3 to 5 years, I also have in bold, one of the things that the city council has to do is approve whether or not any TIF revenue gets passed through to other taxing agencies. And that pass-through TIF is based on what are we doing as a redevelopment commission, as a city council, what projects do we have to accomplish, what debt, outstanding debt do we have. This report is meant to lay all that information out before you, so that when I bring before you the request, I think in June, you can make that decision based on the information that is presented in this report. It also, at the back, is a new section that was added last year. It was presented to the overlaying taxing authorities. At the previous redevelopment commission member, there is a new requirement that municipalities, counties that have TIF districts report what the TIF impact is to each community. To each community and the taxing agencies within that community. So that report in the back starts on page 23, attempts to explain how TIF works, as well as how it impacts other taxing agencies within the community. The back section just has all the TIF areas and the properties that are within those TIF, which is also required to report to the state. So certainly I will ask and answer any questions that you have. Jeff and Mike, I didn't hand you one out tonight. You got yours from the previous redevelopment
Never
commission.
leave home without it.
There you go. But if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Can you tell us on 23, I know I can see school and I can see library, then what does KCSWM stand for?
Solid Waste Management District.
Yes.
Okay,
So you got the library, solid waste, a school corporation, and then townships in the county.
okay.
Several of our TIF districts may have multiple townships in which they are in. Some of them may just have one.
Do you have any extra copies?
I do have. Would you
I'll
like
get
one?
it tomorrow.
All right.
Yes, I put this one.
Questions? I take some time and look at it, and I know you probably have questions, especially this last section. Legislature's really looking at how TIF impacts overlapping units, and obviously what we've learned, some of the financial management, municipal finance companies have worked through scenarios that look at how TIF impacts our community, how it would, if we didn't have the TIF, how those taxes would be spent. When the TIF expires, how the taxes will impact. And with us being a community that's impacted minimally by the property tax caps, the impact of TIF on overlapping units is very minimal. We're required to have a meeting with the overlapping units and explain that once a year, which you just did. And then this report also is again, more transparency on TIF districts. So
Yeah, and I believe the videos from that meeting are still online, so I gave a
Redevelopment
presentation explaining how TIF works, as well as what it means to, when we talk about impact, and how would we measure that impact. The key for me in terms of explaining it to you is there is no specific way to measure the impact. There are a number of ways you could look at how TIF impacts overlapping taxing districts. It can be purely based on the revenue that you're bringing in. It can be based on the impact of the projects that you're developing. It can be based on the additional taxes that are being created that aren't being collected by the TIF district. So all those, the jobs that are created, the housing, the commercial that comes from the jobs that you're creating. So all of those factors play into how you're trying to represent what an impact of a TIF district has on the community, and it becomes really complicated to do that. Typically, throughout the history of TIF districts, the simple representation has been no TIF district, no jobs, no impact. But if you look through here, I give you a couple of different scenarios on how that plays out and how you could potentially measure that impact. At the end, the other important thing of that presentation that I gave is that there is this misrepresentation that if I'm collecting $1 million here, if I don't collect that $1 million then goes to all these taxing agencies, which isn't true. If I'm collecting $1 million here, but all the taxing agencies are already capped at their maximum, the $1 million just ceases to exist. They don't get any more money, it just doesn't get collected. So there's a misrepresentation of how that TIF is collecting, what it's doing, what it's accomplishing, as well as what it means to other taxing agencies. So really, there's a lot of different factors that play into it. So if you haven't seen my presentation before, it should be online in the video section.
Question? Jeremy, thank you. I know this project was a lot of work, and Lynn, I know you were involved in it as well, and again, as another requirement by our legislators that we keep meticulous track of how our increment is spent and how it impacts our overlapping units. Jeremy's provided this report, so I'd take some time and dig into it.
Thank you.
All right. All right.
Jeremy, thank you.
Anything else to come before the council? I do want to mention that right now, you know, obviously we've talked a lot about housing in our community and the need for workforce housing, not just in our community, but communities across the nation are having housing shortages. And I think in our community we're impacted because of the quality of workforce that we have. And there's a demand for houses that we were not able to meet. Jeremy and I and others have been meeting to look at how best a municipality can incentivize the building and/or acquisition of single-family homes in a certain range, and it could be multifamily as well. There are many communities that have different types of incentives, and all across the nation. There's land trusts, there's funds, housing funds that are set up. There's incentives on planning. There's incentives on density. There's a lot of different ways we can go. There's fees can be waived, fees can be delayed. We're working hard with what we have in the state of Indiana to try and come up with a plan that will help us locally kickstart some housing in that workforce range. The one thing we need to do is define exactly what price housing and what size is we want to incentivize. To that end, we're working with the foundation in the county on a housing study that we hope to answer that question. In other words, where are the gaps here, and specifically what level of housing do we need to focus on? There's a lot of problems, and I think there's local solutions, but I'm sure I'm going to come to the council. We're going to come to the council with some recommendations or a plan that you guys are going to have to look at real carefully, and probably make a bold move to help us incentivize our housing, because we've got a problem. We've got an issue with workforce housing. So just to that end, I kind of keep that in mind. And as we sit down and formalize that, you know, certainly we can even put a few of you together to help us get to that point. But the legislature is probably working on some things right now down at the state, some favorable, some not so favorable, to get this done. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens this year, this session with the legislature, to see what options we might have. But Senator Young was in town Friday, and we had a discussion about that, and I think we both agreed it's going to have to be a local solution. So just for future information as we start to work towards that. But I think that's something that's, we're going to have to get on sooner than later, because we've got developers now that want to know how we can help, and we've got to be able to, it's got to go towards what we need, and we've got to have full control over it, and not just make it a giveaway, if you will. It needs to incentivize the type of housing that we need in this community. So, Jeremy, anything to add to that? I know this is a difficult problem.
Obviously, Joe did a good job describing what the challenges are. The one thing I'll add is that we need to look at housing as it pertains to all levels. When we say affordable employee-related housing, you think of everybody. So it's not just necessarily single-family homes. I think we need to also remember that younger people may not be looking for homes. We need apartments, and they need to be affordable, and they need to be targeted toward that workforce housing that we're talking about. So it's across the board. It's not just single-family homes, whether it be duplexes, triplexes, or larger multi-family complexes or single-family homes. What we're talking about is workforce housing in general, hitting a market that provides the housing that is demanded, whether it be rentals or homeowner occupied.
Thank you. All right, any comments from the public? All right,
Yay.
is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.